when an organization starts and they choose to put emphasis on cultural competence, they choose to put emphasis on DEI, what we notice is as they grow, it only now replicates throughout the organization, versus it's actually a lot more difficult for a large organization that's been run a certain way for a very long time to adapt and to change.
So Alisa, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Thank you. Nice to be
here. We met and we had a very good, interesting conversation a few months back. And I said, "Oh man, your story is amazing. I need to have you on the show one day." And we've been going back and forth. We were finally able to get this scheduled, so I'm super happy to do this. So you have an interesting story. You came to this country as an immigrant, as a refugee years ago, and you want to share a little bit about that journey and then how that led to going into the financial sector, and then also owning multiple companies. So I'd love to hear that story, and maybe you can entertain our audience with that.
Sure. Thank you, Sam. And also thank you for choosing to have me on your show. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to hopefully this supporting others that are listening to this as well. So I'll start, to your point, from the very beginning. A little background from me. So first of all, I sit here in Chicago. So I grew up in the Chicago city. So I always like to say that, in the city of Chicago, here in Uptown. And originally, my family and I immigrated from the previous Soviet Union, so from Kiev, Ukraine. My first language is Russian, and I was raised in Chicago by actually my grandmother and grandfather, while both of my parents started over, right? Because when typical immigrant story, when you come to the United States, they did come with a suitcase each, literally, because my mom was actually pregnant with me, and at the time, they told her that in order to have 2 suitcases, it needed to be 2 people, and even though she's clearly pregnant, she could not come with 2 suitcases. So they had to come with 1 suitcase per person to the United States. So I grew up in Chicago, and I would say that what really shaped me as a human, and I think about this often, is really witnessing my family, right, and that grit that in order to make a life here. So starting from scratch. And I recently had a conversation where it really brought light to how that impacted my own entrepreneurial journey, because my family really was the first entrepreneur, right? So when you think about the definition of what is an entrepreneur, it's taking the risk, and the biggest risk that you can take on yourself, right? And starting over. And so my family did just that. And I would say in the most extreme way, right? So they left everything in order to start over, and that was to start over their life. So I saw that growing up. And so it really shaped who I am. And also I'll say the confidence in myself, the confidence to be fearless. I was raised by very strong women, both my mom and my grandmother, who raised me, were very strong in their day to day. And, it was one of those, like, you always have to ask, right? If you need to get a yes or a no, but unless you ask the question, how do you know what that person is going to say? And so it really impacted my own skill sets. And so my skill sets from a very young age, I actually started working when I was 5 years old. I sold bracelets. And so the 1 for 3, 2 for 5 special. I don't remember that time, but I do get reminded by my grandmother that when I was 5 years old and we went to the dollar store, she didn't know where I was. And I've always had the same color of hair. And she sees this this red ponytail and I have a bag. And she looks at me and she goes, "What did you buy?" And I said, "Well, I have money." So I went to go buy my own, I don't know what it was, erasers. And she's like, you've always been this way, right? And so you've always been very independent and self-sufficient. And so I started working at 5, and then I, did the typical babysitting. Then I worked in a restaurant. Then I was a door-to-door canvasser. And then when I went to college, I actually majored in environmental science. And so nothing to do, Sam, with financial services, which is where I ended up working. The reason I majored in environmental science was because my skill set, as you can probably start hearing, has always been really sales, communication, negotiation. And so every year when I was in high school, I would move on to state science fair. And so what that meant is, you have to do a lot of presentations. And my projects were always botany based. So they were always, I received a scholarship to the University of Illinois invitation to attend their environmental science program. And so without even realizing what truly that was, I've always been passionate about the environment, but back when I was in college, it wasn't as popular as it is today, where it was, go green. And so I started in that major. And when I was graduating, this was very close to 2008, 2009, 2010, as we know what happened at that point in our market. There weren't many jobs available that I liked. My options were very much so, you can go move to a small town. And like I had said, I grew up in the city, so I'm definitely a city girl. Or it was, you can go work in a lab and you can focus on being behind the scenes. And my strength is communication, so I definitely enjoy working with people. So I received advice from my dad's good friend because both of my parents, they really didn't know how to steer me just because they did not grow up here. And so for them, it was one of those like, well, you're not a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, so I'm not sure how to help you. And so one of the suggestions I received was, Alisa, you should go into financial services. And so I had no idea what financial services was when I was near graduation, but I'm one of those people, when you tell me where to start, I don't stop. I just don't always know where to start. And so that is how I started in financial services. I literally had a conversation with someone, and because I already knew that I was seeking to find a role in financial services, and I said, "Can I give you a resume?" They worked in financial services. They said, "Sure," and I followed up, and that's how I started in financial services. So I started in financial services. I started, very intro role. I had to get fully licensed, and then I became a financial advisor. I was the youngest financial advisor to also become a certified financial planner. I was number 5 in the company. So then I started getting a lot of phone calls about, how are you doing so well? You're young. Also, you're a woman. There's not many women in financial services. And what I enjoyed most was helping other advisors with their practice and seeing their success. Like, that is what would get my heart thumping and what would give me butterflies. And so I actually asked to make that my full-time job. And I'm fortunate where the company I worked for, they created a role for me. So then I started coaching financial advisors, and my division became number 1 in the company. And then I I moved into a role where I built a platform with a team for lending for small and medium-sized businesses. And that's actually, Sam, where I learned about entrepreneurship, because we were building a platform for business owners. And I absolutely loved having conversations with business owners because, as you can probably already see, I also have a lot of energy and passion. And every entrepreneur that I have met has a very similar energy and passion. And so it taught me that world existed. And then I moved into a institutional role where my clients became entrepreneurs. They were owners of financial services companies, and I would help them with growth of their companies, with development, and then I would also support them with ensuring that their clients were in the best platform in order to support the growth of their portfolios. So I did that next. And I enjoyed it a lot. I was number 1 in the company, so clearly the skill set continues. But what was interesting is, truly, I've always enjoyed, and these experiences taught me that is the impact I can have, right? Like I consciously made decisions that grew my impact. It was being a financial advisor, having individual clients. Then it was coaching financial advisors because then you're impacting financial advisors and their clients. And then it was working with companies because you're working with the companies, impacting financial advisors, impacting individual clients. And so that always was what I learned about myself. What really got me excited is knowing that I was having a big impact.
Hmm.
And so, I feel like I've been speaking a lot here, but at that point in my career is where I made the decision where I wanted to combine my skill set with my passion. And I tested my skill set, I would say, enough throughout the years where I was confident to say, okay, I know what I'm good at. And I also know what I'm passionate about. And now I want to bring those two together. And that is what led me to choose to leave financial services and apply my skill set towards my passion in the companies that we will talk about today.
Yeah, so that's a very extremely exciting story of how you came to where you are today. So, and
Thank you.
obviously, there's a lot of lessons that you learned, having worked for big enterprises and now you own two separate companies. What are some lessons that you learned that prepared you to be a better entrepreneur today from having worked in those bigger organizations?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's very relevant because for those of you that are listening to this, and also myself, every day is a
Mhm.
learning, and every day is a different day and a new application. And I would say that what I really learned throughout my journey, because I worked for a publicly traded company, so I worked for a very large organization, and so I clearly experienced what it was like to have good leaders, what it was like to have leaders that I want to say the word weren't good, but maybe not good for me, right? And I also learned about what it meant to run a successful business. Now, I wasn't part of the board of my company, so I didn't, I wasn't intimately involved, but I was within my own department, right? And so I also learned about what it meant to see a successful business and to see it through different times because in the course of my own career, the company that I worked for was actually, they acquired companies multiple times while I was there. And then at the end, they were acquired. And so I did
Mhm.
experience being on both of those journeys and what that meant within a company. So uh, being the owner of two companies, one of which is started versus the other one which was acquired, I can definitely relate because
Mhm.
I was part of that same exact experience in a larger organization. So I'll say that taught me one thing, and the other piece is the types of leaders, right, that surrounded me. And I will also finally say where I'm fortunate, and I know it's shaped me, is people have taken chances on me. And so when I went into financial services, I did not study finance. So I had someone take a chance on me in order to start in financial services. Then when I changed careers, right? I went from being more in a service level role to being a financial advisor. Someone else took a chance on me, right? Because I didn't have that track record. And then when I decided to go and work with companies, someone else took a chance on me because my experience was more on the retail side versus institutional. So that's what's shaped me is being the product of my environment. And I will say that I'm very fortunate that the people within my life have trusted me, I guess is the best way to put it. And that is something that I do within my business. It's exactly what my businesses are about, which we'll talk about,
Mhm.
is truly forming a foundation to empower everyone.
Yeah. So you obviously, people mostly say, "Hey, go follow your passion. Start, find a problem and try to solve that problem, or go start a company around your passion." But you have two distinct type of businesses, right? And it's in a completely different industry. So you have one LCW, which is actually in the coaching and training, and in the HR and developing people, right? And then the other one
Yes.
in the retail real estate investment and real estate property business. So completely different industry. So how do you balance both of those? I mean, it's a completely different skill set required to run those companies, and how are you balancing those two different acts?
Sure, I appreciate the question, and the question will always be interesting years down the line too, right? Because every day is a new day. I will say that, for me, so LCW, it's my passion. I mean, it is truly what I have always wanted to do. I've wanted to provide a space for anyone to be successful. I want to be the type of leader that I had and that I know is needed for others to shine and successful. And I also know that I am very passionate about your financial future. And so, we work our whole lives and we make money. We live in America. And so most people, statistically, individuals will have a conversation around finances only twice a year. And one of those times is when you do your taxes and you have to. And so for me, a large passion of mine too is finance. It always has been within my own household. It started in an uncomfortable way because my family did have to live paycheck to paycheck. So finances were important because it was a lot of what we can't have, right? And so I started working very early to alleviate that burden. And then what it became is the understanding of what you could have, right? And so that really was what shaped me when I worked in financial services is that understanding of, yes, it does matter how you allocate your assets. Yes, it does matter how you choose what decisions you make from very early on and how impactful that can be to your lifestyle, to your ability to fund your needs, your wants, and your wishes. And so, it's interesting because although very different, both are very relevant in
Mhm.
truly what you need to be successful human being.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about so obviously the one business you're in, the real estate side of the business,
Sure.
and it's about raising capital and growing those companies, and one is really about in the people side of the business, right? Really helping people improve, and also organizations, right? Giving organizations the tools and technology and training that they need to improve the way that they actually treat their employees and how they empathize with and all of those things. And talk a little bit about the passion that you have for this LCW side of the business, and how can organizations learn from like LCW, right, in terms of what they can do better in investing into their employees, in growing their organizations better by investing into their employees.
Thank you. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak about one of my passions, right, which is
Mm-hmm.
LCW. And so LCW is a 22-year-old global cultural competence and diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting, training, and e-learning company. So I actually acquired it from the two previous owners. And what's amazing is this company has been practicing what we now have started discussing in the past couple years for 22 years. And they've been practicing it with global organizations all over the world. And so, truly, what we focus on day in and day out is how can we support organizations, the employees within the organization. So, we are B2B. How can we support employees within organizations to have really an equitable work environment, right? And so, the reason that's important on many different levels, it starts with, we work our whole lives and we make decisions day in and day out and we make those choices. And so how are our workplaces making the choices so that the environments that we are in truly support our success? And so what we focus on is how to do so for all employees, whether they are sitting in Chicago or whether they are sitting in a city in many different time zones from here, whether they look like me or they look like someone else. We really want to ensure that our employers, that the companies that are our clients, that they understand how to create a workplace to ensure everyone's success. And so we do training, consulting, e-learning on many different topics. We just did a conversation around debiasing during performance reviews, right? And so we all have biases. I have biases, you have biases. It makes sense. You are shaped by your environment. And so it's all about education, right? It's all about the understanding of, okay, here's how I think. And so how do I create space to hear the person across from me, right? And so we focus on that with leaders within organizations as well as associates. And the reason it's also very important statistically when you talk to large organizations is because we know that when a workplace is diverse, and when we say that, you have individuals of different ages, genders, religions, socioeconomic backgrounds, races, it does drive success. And the reason it does is because organization is shaped by different mindsets, right? And so we really promote and speak about how to shift the mindset, right? How to create a space where everyone can be successful. And so then the organization can be most successful.
Hmm.
What's exciting is our clients, because we've been working with them for decades, they've won prestigious awards. And so it does work. We see it in statistics, but we also see it in our own results, where when you have the right information, when you have education, when your leadership, right? So starting from the top, starting from the executive level, when they are in support of the trainings, of the coaching, of the learnings, then you do see an impact in the organization. And it does drive higher retention. It does drive these organizations to have higher revenue. It does drive for really that positive work experience. And so, you become the best place to work, which is what every employer strives to be.
Yeah, and I think bigger organization oftentimes, right, they have more resources, they have, HR departments and all of those things. But smaller organizations, it's an afterthought is investing into training, coaching their people, right, their people management team, right, the entire leadership on how to better handle the internal resources that they have, right, the most important resource they have, which is the human capital.
They're people.
Right, how to better invest into that. But a lot of the smaller organization, that's more of an afterthought. It's not like a priority. So how can business leaders really make this a priority? What have you seen as a pitfall or a mistake in small organization when it comes to this side of the business initiative?
Yeah, so I appreciate your question. It's an interesting one because it depends, right? It's interesting because we see large organizations that because there are so many layers, it actually becomes very difficult to sustain a culture of inclusion because it has to start at one level and it has to, it's like telephone. If you ever played that as a kid, right? The message just seems to get different as it continues down, and so we've actually seen that. And then with smaller organizations, we've seen the opposite because they're smaller and you can more directly speak to your executive leadership. But then to your point, there's also the opposite where larger organizations, they do have more resources, right, to invest into these topics, and smaller organizations may not. And so it really depends on where you are in your journey. I'd say that it doesn't matter what size of an organization you are. We have small organizations that are very far along. We have a model that we use, a sustainable culture of inclusion model. And we have large organizations that aren't far along, and we have the opposite. So
Mhm.
I don't want to say honestly that because you have a small organization, you aren't doing the best job of really being inclusive because we've seen both. What I'll say is it's a conscious effort. It has to be a conscious effort. It has to be tied to key performance indicators, right? Because if your people do not know, right, if they don't see day in and day out that this matters, it's very difficult to impact habits. Right. I mean, it's like you need to continue to flex that muscle. And so there needs to be a conscious effort on providing the resources to flex that muscle, right? And so what we find is with smaller organizations, the same types of trainings that we offer e-learnings, we offer consulting services can be applied. But obviously, a larger organization will need 500 trainings. A smaller organization may need three. So we're definitely adaptable based on the size of an organization. What I'll say, and what we've seen is when organizations start early, they truly lead in culture. And the reason
Mm-hmm.
that is because it's from the very beginning, right? When an organization starts and they choose to put emphasis on cultural competence, they choose to put emphasis on DEI. What we notice is as they grow, it only now replicates throughout the organization versus it's actually a lot more difficult for a large organization that's been run a certain way for a very long time to adapt and to change, right? So it's in my opinion most important for organizations to consider how are they focusing on cultural competence and DEI from the very beginning. So I hope that
Yeah,
helped.
do you think do you think big organization or even small, do they should they take a stand on certain issues, whether it be cultural issues or political issues or some of the ideologies that are out there, right? Is that even a good idea for organizations, or should they kind of stay away from some of those discussions and just focus on doing business? They still need to invest into people and building people up and giving them leadership skills and
Sure.
management skills and all of those things, right? But do they need to really take stand on other political matters that may or may not be really directly impacting their business?
Yeah, you're asking a question that, again, and I appreciate your questions because they're all that you can look at them in different lenses, right? And maybe this
Mm-hmm.
is my own practicing my bicultural lens, right? Because I think in two languages. But what I'll say is it depends on the type of company, right? So I have certain personal views, and then I have views from my organization, right? So it's like you wear multiple hats. I wear my LCW hat, and obviously, when I speak from a LCW standpoint, that looks a certain way. And then there's your personal standpoint too. And so, what I'll say, because we've experienced this ourselves at LCW, as we've seen this year, there's been a lot of different topics that have that can arise very strong opinions. We think about what are we focused on, right? So
Mm-hmm.
as a company, what are we focused on? And if it is something we are focused on, then yes, we do provide the education that is needed to help individuals make an opinion, formulate an opinion, support their opinion. But if it is not something that that is part of what we teach at LCW, then we choose to not because it is not our subject matter expertise. And so that is how we make our decisions. And from what I've seen from our clients as well, that are companies, it's similar. So we've noticed that when companies are focused in a certain area, and there is a decision to be made around do they want to take a stance, what type of internally or externally language do they want to have, it depends, right? It depends on what type of an organization they are, what their core competency, what their focus is, and that tends to lead to how they react.
Mm-hmm. So I remember when we originally met, we were talking about, you were talking about buying companies, and one of the core things that you focused on is companies that had scalability as part of their, business strategy, right? Either whether the service or product, whatever they had, it had to be scalable. So how do you define scalable, and what were some of the things that you looked for when you were thinking of acquiring LCW that you knew that it was a scalable business?
Sure. And so let me I'd like to provide terminologies because I think it's important to understand what I was doing in order to get to where I am. So last year, I spent the year searching. And so that is a terminology that exists. And what it is defined as is someone that is choosing to spend their time to find a company to own and operate, and basically to be the succession plan. Okay. And so let me start with that was a conscious decision. And there is an entire market out there that is focused on searching. It's called having a search fund. And once you make that decision, part of that decision, there are parameters that are now set in place. And so there's parameters when it comes to are you looking for a business that is in a certain geography? For me, it didn't matter. I did want to stay in Chicago, but obviously with COVID times, a lot of organizations are now operating virtually and successfully. So that box got checked. The next one was the size of an organization. So there's typically, I was looking for a minimum EBITDA, right? So I was looking for a minimum EBITDA, a minimum revenue. And the reason I was doing that is when you think about scalability, you want to think about how can this company reinvest in itself, right? And so when there is profit left, then those assets can be used to help scale a company, and a history of those profits hopefully increasing, right? And so that was also something that I was looking into. The other areas were, is a cyclical business, right? So is there seasonality to it? So is this product that is being offered, is it only offered at a certain time when it's successful, or is it throughout the year? That's important as well, because when you think about scalability, it's important to understand when can I reinvest into my business, because you have certain fixed costs and you have certain variable ones, and you want to ensure that you are in the best position to make a decision. Uh, for myself personally, when I thought about the word scalable, I also was focused on a certain type of business, because I wasn't just focusing on scalability when it comes to revenue. Yes, it's important. It's important to know that this company can grow, and it can grow, and it can grow with its revenue and the amount of individuals that you can hire and employ. For me, it was also looking at impact. And so the decision that I made, the reason I bought specifically this company versus another, is because when I thought of scalability, I thought about which company would have the biggest impact on the most amount of people. And so, as I've spoken about a little earlier during our conversation, for me, impact is defined as empowering others, right? So ensuring that there is a foundation present where they can be successful with the skill sets that they have, with the support that they need. And so I knew that I wanted to buy a people organization. So I wanted to buy a consulting, training, e-learning company. So I already knew that, right? Now it took time, but I got to that point. And the next piece was, how can I see this being scalable to impact more lives? Because that is what I personally am most driven by. And so
Mhm.
for me, knowing that my organization truly is changing lives, it is changing lives for individuals that are working in large corporations. It is creating environments where more individuals of various backgrounds can feel comfortable and confident to thrive in corporate culture, because it is a type of culture. For me, was very meaningful. And so that is why I chose specifically the company I did, was because I defined success, and I defined scaling as a multiple as multiple items.
Yeah, so obviously you're in the financial sector. You've seen a lot of companies raising money, and you help small businesses, get funds. You bought your own company. You've started your own, real estate investment company. Especially in the service industry, what's like a healthy EBITDA or healthy profit margin that you should be aiming for, whether you want to try to go raise money or you're planning to exit sometime in the future?
That is another loaded question, because it all depends. I apologize. I keep saying it depends, but it's true. So what I learned is, depending on your EBITDA, if you want to sell your company, there's different multiples, right? Because if you have over 2 million in EBITDA, the multiples are higher than if you have under 2 million. It also depends on the sector, right? Because if you have a SaaS company, you're going to get higher multiples than if you have industrial company with hard assets, right? And so when you ask what is a healthy EBITDA, I mean, it's healthy that it's growing. So it isn't healthy when it's not. It is healthy when there is consistency. And so when I say that, right, we talked about the
The seasonality
potential
and all that.
seasonality, exactly. And it's healthy to know who you are, right? Know which industry you're in. It was interesting, because when I was buying my company, I knew what I wanted it to become, what it
Mhm.
is, and where I wanted to go. And that's very important, because
Mhm.
as my company continues to grow, that is very important to understand your identity. And what I've learned is sometimes that's difficult, right? And so, I guess if I were to give advice, have a growing EBITDA, right? So have profit. When you think about margin, it depends on your industry, but yes, it is important for in order to for you to be profitable consistently. And then I'll add that what's also important when you think about a company that is growing is you want to also think through, okay, how is my company positioned for whom I'm trying to be the buyer? And you didn't ask that question, but I do think it's very important because
Mhm.
if you are hoping to sell your company or to buy a company, you need to know your audience, right? And
Mhm.
so it is important to know where do I want to be, so that you know whom do you want to attract as well.
I want to know a little bit about your why. What motivates you? What gives you the drive to just keep going, do this every day, and to keep finding new things to do?
Thank you for that question. It's I've never been happier professionally in my life, and
Hmm.
so I think that's definitely very important to state, but also to reflect on as well. And I do this frequently because it's a choice, right? So every day we make a choice. We make a choice what we spend our time on. We make a choice where we spend our energy on, and we make a choice around what we're doing. And so, what I'll say is when I think about my why, when I think about am I where I want to be, this is exactly where I want to be. So I think I mentioned it earlier, but what I learned about myself from an early age is I love impacting people. I love providing a framework to see others succeed. That is what makes me happy. I look at a relationship with others as having the opportunity to sit along a table, not a chair, right? So for me, it's really important to know that I have the right partners and relationships around me and that we are pushing each other forward. I've always been a collaborator. And so my why is to continue doing that, right? My why is to continue creating an environment where those around me feel that they are in that environment. And so, which is difficult, by the way, right? Because we have our own biases. And so, sometimes as a leader, I learn, I may have a certain intention, but am I communicating it in a way that resonates with everyone around me? So,
Hmm.
to your question around the why and what is my why is to provide the foundation for everyone around me to be successful, and to empower them to shine with their skill sets, provide them the tools, the resources they need to be successful. And so I am living that why.
Hmm.
Now obviously there's always more to do. It's as you know, Sam, being an entrepreneur as well, but I will confidently say that I'm trying. Right, I'm on that path, and it's really exciting. It is very exciting to be on the path that you knew you've always wanted to be on, and so actually having the opportunity to walk that path is incredible. It's everything that I've wanted, and sometimes it's hard, I'm sure personally, but right now it's definitely exciting.
So obviously, as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, right, you have a lot of decisions to make, a lot of strategic decisions, right? What especially with you buying the company, you had to make some real big decisions. Is there some sort of a decision making criteria that you have that you follow when it comes to making critical decisions?
Critical decisions, as there is a decision that needs to be made. It feels like every second of the day. So it depends on what you define as a critical decision. What I'm fortunate about is I actually the way I chose to run my company is I have a co-CEO model. So there's actually two of us that make decisions together, and I consciously chose that because, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm a collaborator. And so I love, I know that I have an opinion, and I also know that there are other opinions, and I really appreciate hearing other opinions before I make a decision. And also because I understand that our opinions are shaped by our experiences. And so we have a co-CEO model. We also have a leadership team. So we have an executive leadership team, and then we also have a principal consulting team. And so what that's done for me is it's really helped me with making critical decisions because now it doesn't only have to be me, right? Now I entrust different teams to make decisions. So what's been incredible about this journey that I'm on is the ability to practice trust and to practice what you preach, right? Provide an environment where others can be successful and empower them. And so it's the ability to make critical decisions has become, I don't know if the word is easier because it's never, I would say, easy, but it's the ability to have partners around you has made it a lot more efficient, right? Efficient, and it's allowed it to move forward, hopefully at a faster speed too.
Yeah, but I've also noticed when you have a decision based on committee, it can also delay decision making, and
Sure.
you have a lot of opinions, but no one really is willing to say, well, this is we should just move forward with this decision. So, how do you avoid some of those without really having a lot of confrontation? How do you avoid those sort of stagnant decision making problems?
Yeah, it's important to have delineation, right? It's important to
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, here is what these individuals are responsible for. Here is what the decisions they need to make, and trusting them to make it, right? And so not micromanaging and not going back and saying, "Wait, I'm not sure if that decision is right," because once again, we may have different opinions, but if we are trusting individuals to make decisions, we have to let them make decisions. And so having that clear understanding of who does what is really
Mm-hmm.
important. And so I don't know if I can confidently say that I'm there 100% of the time, but I will say that we have made the steps that we've chosen to make the steps that we have to have a clear delineation of what decisions get made, and what truly the various jobs, right? Like, what is the definition? Like, here is the process, here is your job description. And that has really helped with not slowing things down. Now, are certain things still once in a while coming back and forth? Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect. But what I will say is we definitely have taken the steps, in my opinion, to really provide that environment where decisions are being made based on various roles. And so I know what I'm here to do, and my counterparts know what they're here to do, and those decisions get split based on what our responsibilities are.
So as an entrepreneur, you have a lot of responsibility, you have a lot of priorities. You're running two separate companies, you have a personal life. So you got to be on the top of your game in terms of productivity. Is there any sort of a productivity hack that you have that you follow to get things done?
So it's interesting because I'm currently reevaluating some of those productivity pieces too, because it feels like every day there's new things added to your plate, which is
Mhm.
fun. Thankfully, I'm very adaptable and comfortable with change, which is, I know, uncommon. I enjoy being on the edge of my seat. What I will say is, for me, at least personally, what I learned fairly early in my career, actually, because I've always liked to add more on my plate. And I know it can sometimes not be healthy, right? Because it is important to also know how to say no and to prioritize. And so, what I learned pretty early on in my life is having a balance when it comes to physical and mental health is really critical. And so, on the personal side, the decisions that I've made, I've completed nine, I believe, 9 or 10 triathlons. And so every morning from June until October, Monday through Friday, I swim the lake. And so I do that with my parents, actually. And so swimming into the sunrise at 6 a.m., I know it's not something everyone can do. Highly recommend doing it. It really does clear my mind, and it really does provide those endorphins and the energy that I need to restart my day,
Mhm.
because every day is a new day, right? The sun will rise the next day. The other things I 2 years ago chose to go to an ashram and gain my Sampurna Yoga teacher certification. I consciously did that because I know my personality at this point. I know that I'm high energy. I do not drink caffeine. And I know that that can be detrimental over time. And so I really wanted to learn how to slow down, learn how to be more reflective, and that experience taught me to do so. Now, do I practice it all the time? I would be lying to you if I said that I do. I'd say winter is easier to practice than in summer because I'm swimming. But I've learned that that helps me as well. It helps me to just slow down, reflect, and then the output becomes a lot stronger. So I'll say those. And for me, family. I live 2 blocks from both of my parents and 4 blocks from both of my grandmothers. That has been incredibly important for me. I didn't even realize how important it would become, and I'm learning it every day. And just having that support system, even if it's we're not talking, right? We're just going for a walk. Sometimes that's all you need. There's a lot always on my mind. And so just knowing that you have a strong support network around you. And finally, I have amazing friends and husband that has really helped me as well. So just having people in your life that have known you way before you are who we're talking about today, it has really been amazing because those are the individuals that you know will always be authentic with you. They've seen you evolve, and they've appreciated you throughout that journey.
Hmm. So knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
What advice would I give my younger self? You know, I'll, it's interesting because I am confident in myself, but I waited to go on this entrepreneurial journey until I proved the skill sets that I thought I had to myself multiple times over. And so, if I were to give myself advice to my younger self, it's to start even sooner. It's I'm fortunate. We're one of the nonprofits that I volunteer through. We coach financial literacy to high school girls. And I did not know about financial services industry when I was in high school. And so the reason I'm choosing to support high school girls is because I want them to be further along than I was at their age. I also sit on the board of a nonprofit called Genesis Works, where we provide internship and career opportunities for high school students in Chicago from underserved communities. Same thing, right? I grew up in Chicago, and I would like, it would have been great to have opportunities in front of me a little earlier just to know that they exist because
Hmm.
it's very difficult to make a decision unless you know that it exists and then you can make that decision. So I would give myself, the advice of making decisions even without necessarily knowing what worlds exist, taking a chance on yourself, and not being afraid to do so sooner rather than later. I'm happy where I am, but I definitely, I'm still me, right? And I was the same me when I was 5 and then 15 and then, in my 20s as I am in my 30s. And so it's, that is the advice that I would give myself.
Awesome. Well, Alisa, I certainly enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for sparing your time and your wisdom with my audience.
Thank you.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.